Welcome, rally fans, to another wonderful day in the Swiss Alps. The crowd is buzzing. The pit crew is getting set up for the race now. We're going live to the field to Jimmy Cogsprocket, who's giving us a rundown on just what they're doing.
Thanks, Sam. The crew have really set up a magnificent course for the scientists. They began by placing the start tiles with the Alps side face up, then randomly selected 3 other tiles to place in a path, finally ending with the finish line right before the village where the racers would end up. 3 different pools of dice were placed beside the tracks, one for each color of die. Cogs also got their own supply pool.
I hear the inventors firing up their cockpits. What's the situation like right now?
Well, as you all know, the inventors will have to build their machines as the rally is underway. So to get started, the pit crew separated all the parts cards by color into separate decks. The bronze deck, the silver deck, and the gold deck. Also, since the races can get fierce, there's a deck just for all the boost cards. Those are the ones with the black borders. Then, each deck got shuffled and placed face down with the top card of each discarded to make discard piles.
We'll let you know what those actually do later in the broadcast. I'm getting word now that the inventors are lining up at the starting line.
That's right, Sam. The inventors each have their own cockpit with one attached engine already, both facing their manager upright.
For you viewers at home, that means the text on the cards should be readable to the player using that inventor.
Their machine is represented by the inventor's pawn, which should be placed on the start space.
Each inventor's manager should also have a damage gauge, set to 0, and a light bulb token with the bright side face up.
Looks like they're about to do the coin toss. Flipping the play direction token and then placing it in between 2 pilots so we know the order of play for the first round.
Thanks, Jimmy. As we get started, I'll remind our viewers that the race takes place over a series of rounds, each with 4 phases. The draft phase, where inventors build up their inventions. The venting phase, where inventors use cogs to remove dice from the machine parts. The race phase, where all the action happens. And the damage phase, the fan favorite, where we get to witness all the wonderful destruction. Now let's get back to the field where Jimmy can explain each of them in more detail.
The draft phase is where inventor pilots build up their inventions, get dice to power them, and collect cogs and boost cards to use during the race phase. Each manager is dealt 1 card from each of the machine part decks. From those 4 cards, a manager will select one and pass the rest in the direction shown on the play direction token. You know, a draft. Immediately after taking a card, the managers have to decide what to do with it. The first thing they can do with a machine part card is attach it to their invention. There are quite a few rules about the valve connections which a manager should check out in the field manual. But the main thing to remember is that while a machine part is in an invention, it must connect to other machine parts by at least 1 valve connection, and all connections must lead back to the cockpit. They can also discard the machine part card to generate power, which is a fancy way of saying take dice from the supply equal to the amount and color found on the machine part discarded, or take cogs in very much the same way. Or if they take a boost card to use, place it under their damage gauge. Once all managers are out of cards to draft, the next phase begins. During the venting phase, inventors can use cogs to reduce pips or remove dice from their inventions. Since placed dice aren't removed from round to round, inventors have to vent in order to clear up space on their inventions. For each cog spent during the venting phase, inventors can remove 2 pips from dice on their invention. If it would reduce a dice to no pips, the dice is removed. The pips may also be removed from different dice, so for 1 cog, you can remove 1 pip each from 2 different dice. Once all the managers say they are done with venting, we move on to the race.
Would you listen to those engines roar? That can only mean one thing: the race phase is about to get underway.
That's right, Sam. All the inventors start by rolling all the dice they've collected from the draft phase. They also re-roll any stored dice from a storage die slot. From now on, the race phase is carried out simultaneously among all managers to speed up the action. At any time during this phase, the inventors can use cogs to augment their dice. By discarding 1 cog, an inventor can either re-roll a die or add a single pip to it per cog spent.
And things get underway as inventors start activating their machine parts by placing dice in the dice slots on them. Each part must be activated 1 at a time in turn, but the inventor can do so in any order, and can even activate the same part again in the same race phase.
To activate a machine part, they place dice from their pool that they rolled at the start of the race phase into open dice slots. The type of dice placed must match the type pictured in the die slot, and depending on how many open slots they have, they can place multiple dice at the same time. The sum of the pips on all the dice placed at the time of activation is the activation power. For instance, Marie Curie just placed a 4 and a 5 together for an activation power of 9. Divide the activation power by the number shown on this icon, ignoring any remainder. That's how many times the machine part's race effect happens. Parts with a star icon only generate race effects once per die, but only need an activation power of 1 or more to activate.
And I'd like to point out, Jimmy, that an inventor is not allowed to place dice into dice slots unless it will activate that part at least once. And, for better or worse, all of the race effects must be applied immediately.
Thanks, Sam. I'll give viewers at home more information on the race effects later. But for now, I want to tell you about what Mr. Santos Dumont just did with his invention. By flipping over his light bulb token, he's activated all the machine parts in his invention featuring the light bulb icon. They got activated all at once in the order chosen by Dumont without having to place a die. And now that he's on his way, let's see how those race effects are affecting the rally. Race effects are represented by icons found on machine parts, boost cards, and even special challenge spaces. Whenever race effects appear in a group, all of them get resolved in any order. But as Sam said earlier, the pilots can't omit any unwanted race effects. Sometimes, race effect groups are separated by a slash. In this case, the inventor gets to decide which group is resolved, but has to choose between them.
Would you look at that? The Wright brothers just played a boost card during the venting phase. Lucky for them, the race effects from boost cards happen immediately, regardless of the phase in which they are played.
Now, the simplest race effect inventors can do is probably gaining a die for each icon. They get to take a die of the specified color and roll it immediately, making it available to activate other machine parts right away. Discarding a die allows an inventor to remove a die from a die slot of the shown color, regardless of how many pips are on it, returning it to the general supply, thus freeing up a die slot to use again in the same round. Gaining a cog allows an inventor to take a cog from the supply. As this is a race, and as you can see, these inventions can go fast. Motion is what gives these machines that forward momentum, and so for every motion icon, inventors move forward one space on the racetrack, resolving any terrain. By using a part that gives smooth motion, they move forward one space, but ignore terrain.
Jimmy?
Yeah?
How does the terrain actually affect the inventions?
I'll get to that when the race reaches the mountains, but for now, inventors are reinforcing their inventions. For each of these icons, inventors increase the value on their damage gauge by 1. However, some supercharged machine parts can cause damage to the invention. And for each of these icons, inventors take damage and reduce the value of their damage gauge by 1. There are additional effects that can happen if an inventor goes too far one way or another on the damage gauge, which is explained in the field manual.
Well, the race is speeding up, folks, and the inventors are just about to come up to the first terrain obstacle.
Well, would you look at that? So they are. Anytime inventors move forward along the racetrack into a race section that has one of these icons on it, they take damage. Just like damage from invention parts, they decrease the value of their shield gauge by the amount shown on the terrain icon. And if they gain multiple motion race effects at the same time, they have to move through the terrain. Yes, Sam, there's no breaks in this race. They can't just stop whenever they want. Part of why people from all over came to watch the race.
And I bet most of them are here just to witness some
Explosion!
Explosion indeed! That's one of the risks the inventors can face if they push their invention too hard or take too much damage from terrain, as the last phase of a round is the damage phase.
In the damage phase, inventors who have taken damage during the race phase will start to lose parts from their invention. If an inventor's gauge is at 0 or more, they've taken no damage and don't move the gauge. If they're below 0, they'll have to lose a part from their invention, basically discarding the machine part and the dice on it for each value below 0 that they are. Then they return the damage gauge to the 0 value.
But if an inventor would be forced to discard their cockpit in this way, they explode instead, just like poor Edison did there only a moment ago. They must discard all machine part cards, and dice from their invention, leaving them with only their cockpit. And move back in the race to a spot just behind the current last place player. Or if they were in last place already, move one space towards the starting line and then finally reset their damage gauge to 0. After taking damage, an inventor can rearrange their machine parts so that they follow all the rules for valve connections. Once all inventors are done with the damage phase, everyone prepares for the next round by flipping over their light bulb token, and someone should flip the play direction token as well. And any inventor with storage die slots can take an unused die of any color from their supply and store it on the slot to be used for next round. 1 die per storage die slot. Any unstored dice are then discarded back to the general supply and the next draft phase begins. Whoa!
Hey Jimmy, what's going on out there?
Well, Sam, Edison just used an earthquake inducer, a boost card. Boost cards that inventors have already drafted can be played at any time during any phase, unless otherwise stated by the card itself. And after it's resolved, it's immediately discarded to the appropriate discard pile. And some have effects that stay in play over the course of a round or phase. In that case, place it beside the racetrack so that everyone may see its effects and discard it once those effects are no longer applicable.
The inventors are coming up to the finish line now. It's gonna be a tight race.
Good.
It's almost neck and neck, I'd say, but it's important to point out that just because an inventor crosses the finish line first doesn't mean they've won. Once an inventor crosses the finish line, that signals that there will be one more heart-pounding round left for the inventors to grease up their thrusters and kick their inventions into overdrive, because whoever makes it furthest past the finish line after that round is the winner. Oh my goodness, Sam, it looks like in a perfectly executed last-second whoosh of forward momentum, our winner of the rally this day is Marie Curie!
And that concludes the exciting steampunk rally. And since I placed my bets on Madame Curie at 16 to 1 odds, that makes me a rich man. So long, steampunk fans. See you never again.
What? Sam? Well, see you all next race.